some of the motives for the different protagonists. You've got Mark Baum, who's very clearly set up from the beginning as like an anti-establishment kind of guy, and
Right.
he's going looking for trouble. He wants to find it. You get Brownfield Fund, where really what they're doing is they find value in the things that people don't think will happen. They say that explicitly in the movie. And
Right.
then you've got Michael Burry's character, who he's so anal about everything. He actually read the CMO document and figured out that these mortgages are going to be worthless by the time the adjustable rates hit, and that people are going to default on their mortgages massively, and there's a money-making opportunity. He's looking at it in a very scientific way. He's like, look, this is what's going to happen. Here it goes. And I think
Right.
that and this maybe is getting a little bit into a later part of what we'll talk about during tension and revelation, but you get Mark
Uh-huh.
Bound's character, who's like, this is who he is, and all of them are shocked by the extent of what's going on in the system. Even though
Right.
we get Mark Baum's character, who's ready to believe it's all rigged and ready to believe it's all going to collapse. You get Brownfield Fund, who's looking for what people don't expect to happen. You get Michael
Uh-huh.
Burry's character, who he's like, this is how it's going to go. This is what's going to happen. This is just how it is. And each
Yeah.
of them has that moment where they're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And
Right.
multiple times. And I think we probably get to that during the Revelation section, so I'll bring it up now. But
Sure. Sure.
I think those are really interesting, especially Mark Baum's, where
Yeah.
he is prepared to see everything is collapsing, and even he doesn't think that it's as bad as it actually is.
Yeah. Well, especially with Mark Baum's character, because you have this background with him about his brother and suicide, and how he has some emotional mental attachment between that and the financial industry because of partially how he dealt with it, and then further on just like the corruption he sees in the financial industry and how that affects other people's lives and ruins their lives. And so he definitely, like you said, that is part of the motivation for him to be very he wants to believe that this is messed up. And so I almost got the impression that each of these characters has something to prove in some way,
Mm,
where they're like, okay, I did the financial analysis and I know this is going to happen, and I need to prove that I was right, that I knew what was going to happen. And then you have Mark Baum, where he's like, he needs to prove that more or less the system is corrupt like he believes, and that they need to stick it to the man. And that's another thing too. Like, Ben Rickert has some background with that. Clearly, they don't explain it as much, but
yeah.
they indicate some very evil things maybe that he's seen, or things that he's very unhappy with when he says things like, oh, every time there's inflation, 40,000 people die, or something along those lines. These different ideas are connecting with people who are frustrated with the system, underdog kind of spirit, have something to
Yeah.
prove, want to stick it to the man. You get all of this sentiment. And this is what's really great is, like, despite, and this is one of the things I thought was very impressive, is like we talked about earlier, these are disparate stories that are going on. They're very, very different characters. They never meet, right? And I had some problem with that earlier, but this is one of the things where I thought was very impressive about the story, was that they all had some cohesiveness to their motivation, to why they were doing this, and it was built around these themes and these ideas that were brought up, that all in all, even though they're very different groups, you're still kind of rooting for all of them, because they all are coming from the same place of, this is wrong, and let's prove it to the world, more or less, that it's wrong. And the making of the money is important, but it's almost more symbolic to them that they were right than necessarily, at least from like a storytelling perspective. Obviously they're right
Right.
to make their
Right.
nut, but like from a storytelling perspective, it's more along the lines of, see, this entire time we knew. And uh when they have financial incentive, it almost had the pushback of the industry to try to say, you can't make money off of this, or we will survive this through our mechanisms in place, is kind of where the fight really starts to get down and dirty. So, yeah, I don't know if that was cohesive enough of a thought process right there, but that's what was going through my head on that. What are your thoughts on that, especially in relation to the big obstacle, which is this behemoth of a financial industry?
Yeah, I think they do a really good job of showing that the rules are set by the industry leaders, right? So you get,
Yeah.
you know, there's that scene towards the end of the movie where Michael Burry's getting a call back from the representative from Goldman Sachs, and he's like, "Oh, we have an update on your credit default swaps. They're now worth the amount of money that they are actually worth. You're welcome." And
Uh-huh.
his character straight up says, "I think what you actually mean is that you have offloaded all of your positions and you are now free because you have a net positive position in credit default swaps yourselves. You are now free to value my positions at their actual value." And the guy on the other
Yeah.
end goes, "I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to say to that." And he goes, "I think you already said it."
Yeah.
And that is just really representative of, I think, what really goes down in this movie as this is the huge problem at the end. That's like, it's not exactly what you would think. Like obviously the big problem is that there's this massive recession.
Yeah.
It's actually, it turns out that everybody's operating on these platforms built by these banks.
Hmm.
And Mark Baum's problem is that his bank might collapse and he might lose the entire position. And
Right.
Michael Burry's problem is that the banks won't price the credit default swaps at their actual value until they
Hmm.
can save their own butts. And there's another great movie about the financial crisis called what is it? Oh shoot, I wrote it down. I've only seen it like once or twice. Margin. It's called Margin Call. That's what it's called.
Okay.
Margin
Yeah.
Call is Kevin Spacey, and that is about kind of the other side, the inside of these trading platforms and these banks when they
Hmm.
realize what's going on, and it takes them till like subprime mortgages are actually defaulting at a massive rate to
Right.
get to the point where they're like, we need to offload this entire position.
Right.
And it does a pretty good job of showing how cutthroat the whole thing is. You've got
Hmm.
traders who are just dumping this position on unwary buyers who are going to be
Hmm.
entirely screwed over by these soon to be worthless commodities. And then they all get fired because the bank needs to trim.
The fat. Yeah.
Like, that's it. That
Yeah.
like they dump and they get fired, and that's it. They lose all their relationships on Wall Street. So
Wow.
it's it's really interesting because you get this massive obstacle that's immovable, and that's the thing
Hmm.
that's really interesting is that they don't move the obstacle. The obstacle shifts for them at its own pace.
Hmm. Yeah.
You got, because Mark Baum is the only one who sits on his position
Hmm.
until it becomes entirely necessary for him to sell. But even he is beholden. Like, who's buying his position?
Right.
It's a bank. Like,
Right.
so it's really interesting that this obstacle comes to all of them, and it kind of makes it I think is probably the most compelling part of the story as to why we need overhaul in the system is these three guys spotted a problem, they exploited it. They're going to make money, they're going to be heroes, and they can't do it because the system is allowing these banks to just do whatever they want until everything collapses. So
Right.
I thought that the obstacle was quite good and really too real, if we're being honest.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I thought that this was especially because usually you're having not always the case, right? But in a lot of movies, a majority of movies, the obstacle in the way of the protagonist is usually embodied in a person or a group, whereas in this case, it's more of a machine, a giant societal machine that has been built up over time until it's such a big behemoth that the question is, like exactly like you said, it moves on its own pace. And what was really interesting, because I thought, oh, it's like, will they make their money or will they not? When you first watch this movie, you're like, well, okay, clearly they're going to make their movie, or I mean, make their money, or else why would they make the movie, right? But then the way they portray it is more, okay, we know the system is going to collapse. The question is this machine so big that it can still screw you over even as it's going down? And I think that was what was so compelling, because you see that as things ratchet up, their ability to wait out the system, right? Pay those the what was it, the monthly
It's literally premiums like an insurance policy. Yeah.
right. If you can pay the, like, they're running out of space to pay the insurance premiums, and they have to sell off other assets or stocks that they were holding on to and whatnot, right? For the sake of making this position still work, and try to wait it out long enough, in the case of Michael Burry specifically, to actually make a profit off of this and make good on their bet. So it's definitely, they did very well, and this is getting some into the heightened tension, but yeah, it's definitely a fascinating way that they developed the story, so that even though you know what's going to happen with the end of the story, everyone knows the recession occurred, you still have this thing of, oh, are they going to be able to stick it to the system? Do the underdogs actually make it out and make it out alive, more or less, right?
Yeah, right.
And so they do that very well.